Hi, everybody. I'm 25 years old, making me one of the oldest members of Generation Z. Our generation has grown up at a unique time in history. Because of the internet, we've had virtually unlimited access to information from a very young age, unlike any generation prior to us. And while that does have some good side effects, it also means that we've been exposed to our society's injustices from a very young age. At 14 years old, I was politically awoken by the Sandy Hook shooting, which left a classroom full of kindergartners dead. Nothing was done about it, and the shootings continued year after year, as we saw just last week in Nashville, Tennessee. When I was 16 years old, I watched the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement online in response to the police killing of Michael Brown. But it wasn't an isolated incident. Then came Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile. The bodies continued to pile up, and the sense of heartbreak and outrage within me only continued to grow as nothing was done about it. And it seemed like the bad news just continued to pile up. And so I decided to do something about it. When I was 18 years old, I became very heavily involved in activism and electoral politics. I started as an intern on a county commissioner's campaign and was then hired as a traveling field organizer to travel the state of Tennessee in the fall of 2016, working for candidates that I supported. But despite my best efforts, the candidates I supported didn't win. And it seemed like the next few years were an onslaught of constant bad news. In 2017, some of my closest loved ones were all of a sudden worried about being deported after their DACA protections were taken away, after being here virtually their entire lives. In 2018, Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducted one of the largest workplace raids in U.S. history down in Morristown, Tennessee, separating nearly 100 families and affecting people that I love dearly. That same year, in 2018, the IPCC released a report saying that we had only 12 years to eliminate carbon emissions or face the worst outcome of climate change. It seemed like every time I got online, the bad news kept coming in. The Amazon was burning, another deportation, another mass shooting. When was it going to end? And just when things seemed to be at their worst, we were all hit with a global pandemic. For many of us, for the first times in our lives, we had to worry about our own health and experiencing the devastating effects of social isolation. I began to feel anxious, depressed, and powerless, and I wasn't alone. In fact, Generation Z faces one of the largest anxiety and depression outbreaks in history, more than any generation prior to us. This is leading to a lowering life expectancy, increased rates of self-harm, and increased addiction. And I think that sense of despair and powerlessness that has gripped so many of us in the face of massive injustices that continue to go unaddressed, I think that despair is what is leading to these high rates of anxiety and depression. But I'm here today with good news, because I no longer feel gripped by that sense of despair, and I believe that all of us have the ability to move beyond powerlessness and become the change makers that our communities and that our world desperately needs. So my first step of moving beyond powerlessness was recognizing my own limiting beliefs. Without realizing it, I had adopted two beliefs. One is that things were getting worse, and two is that I couldn't do anything about it. I think so often we are our own worst enemies. We convince ourselves that we're not capable, that we're not good enough, that we can't do the jobs that we're supposed to do. This phenomenon has become so common that we've given it a name, imposter syndrome, as Macy pointed out earlier. And I think this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point, because you can't achieve what you don't think you can achieve. So if you want to move beyond powerlessness, you have to start by identifying those limiting beliefs. But you can't stop there. You've got to take the next step, which is speaking out against your internal detractors. I do that through positive affirmations. Literally, I will repeat and write on paper, I am capable. I am good enough. I am qualified. And this came into play heavily in my life last summer when I decided to move back to Johnson City, Tennessee, to finish my degree here at ETSU. Simultaneously, I was hired as a campaign manager of a local state Senate race. And while it was really exciting, I had never stepped into that lead role of campaign manager. I'd only done organizing work. And I started to convince myself that I wasn't capable. I started saying that I wasn't qualified, I didn't have the skills, I didn't have what it took. But once I recognized those limiting beliefs, I was able to speak out against them. And again, with those positive affirmations, I started writing and repeating to myself, Noah, you are capable of doing this job. Noah, you have what it takes to gain the skills you need for this job. And it turns out I was right. But that's only because I took the next step, which is taking action that aligns with your affirmation. It wasn't enough for me just to say I was able to do it, because I had to show up that first week and put in the work. It required me to learn a lot of new skill sets, to learn a lot of new online systems, and to become very organized. Google Calendar and reminders became my best friends as I tried to manage balancing 21 credit hours at ETSU and managing a political campaign. But I was able to do it because I took action that aligned with my affirmations, and I was consistent about that action. And that's a really critical part. I think a lot of us see this word consistency as a little bit boring, but I don't see it that way at all. I see consistency as the action of every day, little by little, making your dreams a reality. But perhaps the most important step in the journey of moving beyond powerlessness is the very last one, which is to be thankful and to never give up. You see, unfortunately, you will face defeat. In fact, the story I'm telling you about today was a case of defeat for me. The candidate I supported didn't win. And I could choose to look back at that and say it was a total loss, say, what was the point? But I choose to look back with optimistic gratitude. Because while we weren't able to flip the district, we were able to shift the district 7 percentage points. While we weren't able to flip the district, I was able to hire a staff of 19 people, many of whom had never worked on a political campaign before, and some of those went on to work on campaigns after the one I was working on. And I wouldn't even be here today if it weren't for that failure. In fact, someone from the campaign, someone who's here in this audience tonight, actually recommended me for this tech talk. So I wouldn't be here today without that experience. So looking back with gratitude is important, but it's just as important to never give up. When you look at history, there are so many examples of people who made great changes after they faced initial defeat. Think about Abraham Lincoln, who famously lost many elections before becoming the senator and ultimately president of the United States, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing enslaved people in the South. Imagine if he would have given up after his initial defeats. When I look to history, I see so much hope for the future. Imagine for a second being in the 1700s, looking at an entire global economy based on the brutal enslavement of human beings, and saying that it was possible to completely abolish the transatlantic slave trade. People would have laughed you off. People would have called you ridiculous and said that it would never happen. But that didn't stop the initial abolitionists. They spoke out against the limiting beliefs of their society. They took action. They were consistent, and they did not give up in the face of their initial defeats. No, they pressed on, and some even gave their lives, but they didn't stop until they reached freedom, until the transatlantic slave trade was history. The same could be said of the women's rights movement in this country. Women who were treated like property in this country came together and demanded political and social rights, and they didn't take no for an answer. Some of them were arrested, some of them were beaten, some of them had their teeth beaten in, but they pressed on until they won. The same could be said of the civil rights movement in this country. Just imagine for a second if they would have given up in the face of initial defeats. We would never have the rights that we have today in society. So today, I know I've talked a lot about politics. because that's my experience. And if you're interested in this, I highly encourage you to get involved. Come talk to me afterwards. I would be happy to be a resource for you because it's really important work. And similarly, if you're thinking about running for office, I hope you do it because we need, now more than ever, bold, visionary leaders making decisions for us. But this lesson that I'm talking about today goes so much further than politics. Because each and every one of us have a purpose, have a meaning, and have a specific role to play in the changes and making the change that our society needs. So today, I challenge you to move beyond powerlessness because you and me and every single one of us are the change makers that our communities and that our world so desperately needs. Thank you.